Hello everybody, I'm Jonathan Albin and this is our new show, Roleplay Roulette. This episode is the first of our series and the first of any roleplay in the Nycos Grand Experiment here. So episode 1, Dreadnaught Squadron. So if you are hopping in and have not watched our show before, welcome. Make sure you like and subscribe, and if you want more information, check out patreon.com/Nycos and find out how you can be a part of this grand experiment. All right. So, episode 1. A little bit of background. This exposition is unfortunately required and will be pretty much at the beginning of each episode, and I will be using a specific name for that. So let me pull this up here and clarify. It has its own little name, and that is our story so far. I actually use this in my regular roleplay groups as a mechanism to remind us all where we are, because it is a challenge, really, to keep in mind all the details of every episode that I do. And since I'm currently running 6 game sessions a week, and that's 6 different groups of 6 to 10 players, that means there's a lot of stuff going on and a lot of stories that are separate. So if you want to be a part of it, you can, even if you're watching this on YouTube. Yes, I'm talking about you, sir, who's not played a roleplay game since you were 12 and you think it'd be fun, but you're not sure how to get started again. Welcome to the game. My nefarious plan, until it becomes absolutely untenable, is to run a roleplay game for those players who are online with me or who have watched the previous episode, and I will take their input and therefore sculpt the story for the next week's episode. And so our story so far will always be a recap. As this is the first one, the exposition is going to be literally about the setting and the information that you need to know in order to play. So, Dreadnaught Squadron is a game in an alternate history period in the world of Nycos. Now, first of all, Nycos is a fantasy sci-fi merger type of setting. In particular, it is traditionally Dark Shards, high fantasy, deep state, mysteries and spies. And so this is somewhere between them, but add into it a little bit of the Dread Signs era, so it's pre-World War II. And so we are involved in what is being considered at this time the Great War. Now, it started in Yarland when the leader of one of the factions was untimely put down by another culture, and accusations started flying about who might be involved, leading to that first Great War. And so we are starting our setting about 18 months into the war. The skies over East Yarland have been cloudy and gray, and the reddish tones of the ocean have been accentuated by black clouds hovering out over the sea for several days. It portends of a great storm, but it has not yet broken. Our story begins upon the vessel Dreadnaught, and that's a funny thing to call a Dreadnought class ship Dreadnought, but it literally is the first of the fleet. Now, a Dreadnought, by definition, is a heavier than air aircraft, designed by, I believe it was, Ludwig Zeppelin, Zeperyn. Nycos name, not anything you really know about, but no, that Zeppelin was one of the persons who instituted heavier than air aircraft that were being held aloft by the gas released when balsamic powder is burned, put the Eastern Kingdom of Bylos at the forefront of technology. So the Dreadnaught's name is currently, as I said, Dreadnought. If we as a group decide to change that name, or you come up with a pretty cool name for this first vessel, I totally believe in retconning. I'm a rule of cool storyteller, not a rules as written person. Not that the rules are widely dispersed, but as a quick aside, if you go to NycosRPG.com and go to the Ready to Play section, you can download a PDF of the Master Book Fast Play Rules. I think it's a 8 or 10, 12 page PDF covering the basics of how to play Nycos RPG. And also there you can pick up a copy of the Persona profile packet. It's a 3-page document that you'll need to have for your persona. You can play roulette without a persona. You don't have to have one, but if you're looking for the real experience of playing a role-play game with us, you will want to download one to keep with you while you're watching and playing. So in this role-play roulette, you pick a persona to represent. You don't have to be a military person to be aboard the Dreadnought, as it is the flagship and the centerpiece, considered to be the equivalent of the German airship Hindenburg. Not hopefully with that end, but it could always happen. But the concept is that you are guests upon the maiden flight of the Dreadnought we're calling currently cleverly Dreadnought. This vessel has a displacement of, I think it was 2 million cubic meters of brissom gas provided by 4 lower port engines. They tend to have to steam at about 20% or so to maintain flight status. That means they've got enough buoyancy to be airborne. And the loss of lift from this material is relatively slow because the craft's skin is actually liminal coated, that is provided with a magical sheen that holds the gas in and thereby allows for the buoyancy. So with those 4 engines chugging away happily at about 20%, the vessel can stay airborne virtually forever. Of course, it does require fuel, and that comes in the form of literally coal cars worth of balsamic powder, akin to what we would think of in Terra as black powder, but it's just a naturally, magically reagent material that is mined from the mountains of the world of Nycos. So there's 2 to 3 coal cars worth of fuel aboard on the launch of any mission, and the Dreadnought is engineered to have about a 3-month flight duration, so it can continue flying from location to location for about 3 months before it will need to refuel. So the engineers in the group are already doing the math to figure out how fast that burn rate is and how much fuel has to be shoveled in. I don't personally know those numbers because I don't particularly care. I just set out the parameters. Then we can work backwards for players that are interested in that. I guess that's probably one of the things that I have to say about the world of Nycos is that in any of our adventures, when you are in the game, you are determining the level of attention we give to any given detail. So the farther down you drill in a story, the deeper the hole becomes. And there's 50 years of story that we can draw into. But in this case, we are speaking specifically within the Dreadnaught Squadron era of the game. Now, this Dreadnaught also has a couple of peculiarities, one of which is that there is a tiny hangar literally on its spine that basically it's dorsal, so it's way up on the top of the craft. And from that point, this vessel can launch small airborne aircraft. So these smaller craft are powered by brism, but by the active burning of it, and so therefore they're much more volatile. They have a much shorter flight time, and they're rather smoky. They are almost, if you were going to do a storyline comparison, you'd say this was somewhat of a steampunk kind of an era, because these brism engines belch out a lot of black powder as a result of the conversion process, which basically equates to dropping 1 drop of luminous into 1 ounce of powder and letting the two react for a period of time before you have to repeat. But of course, the larger bore engines use more, and so the fighter craft tend to be fairly high-powered, high-performance craft. And they actually have a landing strip of a type on the top of the craft, akin to the flight deck of a aircraft carrier. So, therefore, as a member of this adventuring group, you can choose whether you want to be a member of the crew of the Zeppelin Dreadnought, or if you want to be a member of the flight crew for the fighter craft. Perhaps you're a novelist who's simply going to visit the war front because you're concerned with what it's doing to humanity. Perhaps you are a journalist who simply is tracking the details of this maiden flight. But before we actually launch into the mission story, I wanted to give you a little bit of background. So, the skies of Nycos are not blue as they are here on Earth. Instead, they are somewhat of a purplish gray. I think the actual formal term for the color is mauve. But just like the sky is blue, the blue can be anything from cerulean to indigo, depending on the time and weather conditions. So it's hard to say the sky is mauve. But generally speaking, it's that pinkish purple. And that's because it's reflective of the fundamentally magically photosynthetic life that lives in the ocean itself, giving it its deeper color. Along the shorelines, the oceans take on a kind of a rosé wine coloration, barely some pinkish tones to it, but generally looking almost clear. As you go out into deeper waters, however, the life forms that live beneath the waves tend to convert their energy from the light spectrum and reflecting red. So therefore, in the deepest parts of the ocean is virtually black because the depth of the hue becomes so deep, and therefore it's considered to be black water. So a vessel that travels out over the ocean, once they're getting beyond the line of sight to the shoreline, they are entering black waters and therefore entering areas of danger. Now, the central body of water between the two continents of Yarlum and Groland is called the Twain Sea, Tweyn, and the Twain Sea's depths do get considerable. There is a Challenger trench level crevasse that runs down the middle of the Twain Sea, providing it with the deep black color that most sailors are familiar with. But that body of water, although treacherous, because of the merits of powered flight and powered sea craft, you can crisscross the water surface relatively easily. Ludwig van Zeppelin built the very first of the Zeppelin. I should say Zephyrin. Yeah, I think we'll call them Zephyrin. Zephyrin. The Zephyrin craft are fundamentally built because of the precarious nature of sea travel. You see, the oceans of the world of Nycos are rife with all kinds of sea life, to the point where, according to myths and legends during the more ancient times, the very creatures of the sea were able to inhabit the airways. So the Zephyrin was Ludwig's concept of how to move with luxury and style over the areas of conflict and be virtually unscathed. Now, the craft's flight characteristics do limit its elevation to right around 8,000 to 10,000 feet at the upper ends, not because of atmospherics per se, but instead of temperature. There is a radical cooling that occurs as you go more airborne, and so the upper elevations are very near unto impassable as you simply get too cold within craft. Even if you have excellent heaters, the idea is that the craft will cool down far too quickly if you get above altitudes of 10,000 or so feet. Therefore, although in this era firearms do exist, they have figured out how to compress the balsamic powder to a very small area, encapsulate it, and then once you break that seal, release all that energy. So there are ballistics and there are even artillery pieces, but they are too slow and cumbersome to re-aim that a Zephyrin can outrun. Even the slowest Zephyrin flying into a headwind can outrun the guns on the ground if we're talking about artillery. But that doesn't stop small arms fire. For that reason, the captain of the Zephyrin will usually deploy 2 to 4 Magi, fore and aft, whose job it is to prevent small arms fire or perhaps interference by airborne creatures from beneath. Now, there are, unfortunately, in any scary story, you have to have beasts that can ply those terribly cold temperatures above, and so we do have drakes and other horrible beasties that fly. They pretty much live their lives aloft in those higher elevations. But we're not going to be concerned with those as this is the early part of a fall, and therefore they have already begun their processes of going into dormancy, whatever those mechanics are. We haven't discovered them yet. So this is the very first story I'm telling in this realm. There's a lot of who knows going on here. So if you are viewing this and you want to put some input, feel free from here at the get-go, because this is a role-play game. I'm the storyteller, and if you're sitting here watching this, you are part of the games group. Whether you are an active participant or just a passerby or a bystander who just wants to listen in, nonetheless, just realize you can submit conversation into the chat, and I will respond to that, because even though I spend most of my time trying to look at the camera, if you haven't noticed, I do happen to tend to drift my eyes to what would be the right here. All right, pardon me for a second. Rehydrate. Alrighty, so this is a crisp October morning. The Zephyrin named Dreadnaught has finally left dry docks to much ballyhoo and lots of celebration and excitement The cabins are ample. If I recall correctly, the Zephyrin Dreadnought can carry a crew and complement of about 60 personnel. So it's a healthy vessel, and it does have a considerable cargo compartment, which has been sequestered by the Bylani government for special projects. So we're not sure what we're carrying, but we do know this maiden voyage is meant to circle the globe. The intent is for this vessel to become the equivalent of the Great White Fleet in the Roosevelt era, and present to the world the strength of the Bylani Empire. We are lifting off from a city that is called Talos, and Talos is a metropolis by sheerest definition, an industrial port city, multifunction, and acting currently as the capital of Bylon. They are working on a tower, of course, because we have to have those quirky comparatives, but they are building basically a standalone city-state out in the plains of Bylus, which will, of course, be called Babel or Babylon. And it's just now under the engineering review, with the first workers showing up in the spring. So this is rather ambitious of the Bylani government to be preparing for such a massive undertaking, literally on the eve of the beginnings of a world conflict. Nonetheless, there are more than 20 ports of call on the docket, and we are currently steaming out of Bylos, and we are heading south. Now, there are 2 places that will be stopped at along the continental ridge as you round the horn. And the first of those will be a place known as Snowland's Call. And it's said to be a fairly cold place. It's at elevation because it's in the mountains on the south. And so the Zephyrin is perfectly suited for going there, even when the weather is so inclement that vehicles and even pilgrims can't ascend to its heights. So it's going to be somewhat of a mercy run to Snowland's Call to make sure they have sufficient supplies. It has been a rather treacherous winter so far, and with a shortened harvest season leading into this, Snowland's Call may actually be at its lowest supplies in decades. So some are conjecturing, of course, that perhaps at least a portion, if not the majority, of the cargo space that's been sequestered by the Bylani government may be supplies for Snowland's Call and other places, and it's being kept from the populace to prevent there being any kind of raiding and such going on, simply because the times have been so hard that they've got to take every precaution. So if you're joining me and you haven't heard, this is the Roleplay Roulette Experiment, Episode 1, Dreadnaught Squadron. Literally it's called so because that's what we rolled on the roulette wheel, which is why it's still showing. And we will be using the roulette wheel every Friday to run a roleplay game. And I'm going to be doing this in almost like a play-by-mail concept. I'm going to present the information, put it up on the YouTubes, so to speak, and then you will be able to put comments in there to give actions for persona in the game. But if you're here on Twitch, you have the rare benefit of actually being a player in this very first concept, and each week we'll be adding additional players as they find their courage to do so. And it doesn't mean you have to be a full-on persona. It's not like a traditional role-play game where you've got to build your character and go. You can actually put the notes here in the chat box, and I'll just go with whatever we come up with. Now, when we get to the point where we have too much text coming in, we may not be able to do this anymore, and we'll have to figure out another way to do it. I anticipate eventually it will be a subscriber function. So if you subscribe now, you'll be grandfathering yourself into any of those kind of conditions in the future. And that includes when we go to the subscriber base on YouTube. So that's yet another consideration for why you want to make sure that you like and follow us here and subscribe if you can, so that you lock yourself into the subscriber benefits package, or conversely that you join us over on the YouTube channel. There, of course, play is not going to be live, at least for a while, because I don't broadcast over there live shows. Not that I won't in the future, but I'm reserving all of those for now. But I'm leaving that as a benefit for watching here on Twitch and being a part. You can actually interact immediately with us. Alrighty, so as I said, we're leaving the city of Bylus. The moorings that have kept us Nycos bound are being released by the ground crew. The wind is a brisk, I always remember, northeaster. So the wind is blowing southwest. I always get it backwards, but you just name the wind by where it's coming from. So it's a nor'easter blowing in. That stormy cloud bank has not yet seemed to make any approach towards land, so it may be lucky enough that we can get far enough south to avoid that. The captain has basically turned off all the known smoking signs, and the beverage carts and the food carts are beginning to roll down the stateroom corridors. The vessel is a absolute picture of luxury. Although we have a crew and complement of 60 personnel, the number of civilian personnel is nearly double that. Most of them sightseers, many of them businessmen, and a few journalists in the mix as well. And if you're viewing and you want to play, you can pick any of those to be. As a matter of fact, you don't have to pick a specific one. You can call out just simply for me to add in dialogue scenes and such, because those can be the best, especially when we get interactors on both sides of the conversation from the audience, so to speak. So this is an experiment. I don't know how well it's going to work, and this is literally the first episode, so we won't know really until next week how much of a pickup this is, but we're going to give it a shot. And until I've been told I can't do this anymore, we're going to continue to do this. I have been a storyteller and game master for 50 years before this, damn it, and so I'm sure I can go another 50 years in this kind of a format, just adding additional players and widening the vision of what roleplay can be. So, the local news. Let's back up a little bit and talk about the newspapers. As the ship starts to steam out and blasts the air horn to announce its departure, the gathered crowd are shouting their support and waving frantically, trying to capture the eye of someone with a camera who might take their picture from this as yet nominally undiscovered vista. While, as I said, flight has been a active part of the world of Nycos for 20 to 30 years, and the technology is rapidly improving. Nonetheless, there are those who have been afraid of it, and culturally, many of the kingdoms have not supported the activities of the daredevils who fly these machines, simply because of the risk that they represent and that they are an unknown quantity. Some of them have even labeled the concept of air power to be a joke, a passing fancy, a fad, if you will. But if you're aboard, you actually are dedicated to this in some fashion, whether to debunk it or to support the activity, or simply to get from here to there. The vessel's 20-city path includes some of the greatest capitals in the current world of Nycos, and visiting locations on both sides of the building conflict. Now, there has been some active gunfire in isolated areas, but so far the governments collectively have been downplaying and poo-pooing those challenges, suggesting that it's wayward soldiers who are out on weekend leave with a little bit too much alcohol and too much ammunition. The crew of the Dreadnought are dressed to the nines on this launch day. They're wearing their dress uniforms where they can. Even the workers who are on work detail are wearing their cleanest and most shipshape sailing attire as they can get. Now, the coloration of the Bailani fleet are blacks, golds, and reds, with emphasis on black. The majority of the uniform is black. Now, in the case of the dungarees of the workers aboard, no, they're actually the traditional deep indigo, deep purple of the local clothiers. And while they look rather ragtag, many of them have detachable patches and functionally different sleeves that can be placed on. There are areas of the cloth that are built so that you can attach or detach a pocket with just a minimal amount of tugging. And so those who are precise engineers and such might have 40 or 50 of the small pockets covering their chest and their upper thighs, almost the way, say, Terrans like their cargo pants and vests, but especially if they have, as the Black Widow would say, so much pockets. The core uniform for your day workers, your attendance crew, are the typical deep red and white narrow striped shirts, short sleeve, close cropped, and again the deeper, almost purple dungarees. And they usually blouse their boots that are like shiny leather because of the active trade with the Trelorans, and for the amount of seal cloth and such that they can purchase from the mirror. It's a rather extensive and rather fancy looking arrangement. The vessel is utilizing in its galley the finest silver, flatware, and dishware possible that has been acquired from the Eldrin populations in the Highlands. As I said, the city of Bailon is a metropolis, and if you can't get it in Bylos, it doesn't exist. That's fundamentally the rule. So there are even a couple of the that's what I'm looking for. Travelers with tickets. What's the word for it? God, my brain just froze. But several of the passengers, that's what I was looking for. Several of the passengers do have unique companion animals, including one or two of oversized lizards. Some would call them wormlings. And there's also, at least on that first, as you were first boarding, you thought you saw a fairy dragon. So there may be a small mystical lizard with butterfly wings aboard, but you haven't seen it since day one, since the morning you boarded, which was yesterday. So you've keep your eyes open for that. Meals are either served in your cabin on request, or in the large galley area, the cafeteria area, on the leeward, the leeward side of the middle decks. They switch from the leeward side to the windward side depending on the velocity of the winds aloft, because if the vessel is steaming along as it is right now with the tailwind, you could pretty much sit on either side, but to maintain the community feel, they are segregating just to the leeward galley deck and the mezzanine. There are 4 levels of of compartments. You can be in first class, you can be in standard class, or you can be in steerage. And the ones that are in steerage are actually tiny compartments that run along the entire spine of the vessel, even back between the 2 large cargo pods. So a great number of personnel walk up and down this major main corridor, and generally they'll do so either on the main deck or on the mezz. And the mezz is a deck that only runs half the depth of the ship inward, and then you have to descend by staircases or lifts down to the main deck. And the main deck corridor goes, as I said, all the way back. But security teams are set up at the midpoint just before cargo, and they're checking IDs to make sure everyone aboard is legitimate and has the appropriate tickets and accesses for those locales. The final bit of information I want to go over is that we are, as I said, going to Simon's Call, and so most people are dressed in their finery, but also with fairly sturdy and warm winter clothing. It was warned early on that the vessel may at certain times be forced into higher elevations, and therefore it would be necessary to have the cold weather gear. But they do have, of course, within your own wardroom, you have the capability of putting your clothing into your trunk, and therefore providing it a modicum of safety and security. There are, of course, for the first class, additional benefits such as a ship's safe, but the only persons that have access to that are on a fundamentally need-to-know basis, and as a nominal passenger, you wouldn't have a need-to-know. So all of those details are remaining out of touch. So we have now set the stage for Dreadnaught Squadron. I've provided a little bit of information about the setting and where we are starting, and I anticipate that we will have players boarding between now and next week. If the off case that does not happen, of course, we will continue the voyage on a narrative basis with or without players. But I want to thank you if you've been watching with us and been a part of the show. Thank you for your support. We hope that you are a follower for the channel. If not, I would definitely recommend subscribing to the channel, because subscription means you don't have to watch the annoying commercials. I know that we've gone over the traditional 30 minutes of my episodes, so I know that you had to endure commercials for today, and unless, of course, you're one of my few subscribers. But, of course, feel free to do that in the future to avoid that. Also, if you are watching on YouTube, this is the episode for Friday, the 18th of October, and we're going to be doing this on an ongoing basis every Friday at 10 a.m. We also broadcast at 11 p.m. and again at 10 a.m. every day, Monday through Friday, so you can get additional information on the world of Nycos, some tips and insight as a 50-year game master, and provide you with the tools to make your games excellent, including the new Nycos RPG toolbox. So that will be coming soon. We are in the final stages of getting the initial edition edited. Don't say that too many times fast. That's too many E's in a sentence. But when we have that initial set of volumes ready, we will be announcing a Kickstarter. So watch for that in the upcoming months or so. So until then, thank you again for being here, and we really appreciate you being here for Roleplay Roulette. And I will talk to you next